Alright, Hondata Flashpro, ladies and gentlemen. On this video, we're going to be... Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Hondata Flashpro. On this video, I'm going to be going through the software here. I'm going to break it down to you guys, all the segments in Hondata, the options it provides for our R18 engine, what we can adjust, what we cannot adjust, and maybe you can learn a little bit about tuning from this video. So enjoy the video, guys. It's gonna be a long one. Ooh, yeah, baby. All right, so this is actually the software. You can download Hondata software for free on Hondata.com. And that's exactly what I did first and foremost when I started to learn. You can download this software, you can get familiar with it, and I definitely recommend it if you're going to be trying to tune your vehicle yourself. You got to get familiar with the platform. Now, you can definitely look at a lot of options here that it provides, but you can't look at data logs. But the good thing is, people post data logs for Hondata tunes all over the web. If you go on Hondata, there's people that upload their tunes, upload their data logs. You can use those data logs and run through them, check the parameters and whatnot, adjust things, play around with it. That's exactly what I did, and I think all those hours I put into looking at Hondata, reading through the actual manual that Hondata has to offer, was a great source and definitely something that will help you get started tuning your vehicle. So let's get on with it right now. This is the platform you guys are looking at right now. This is Hondata in its basic form. So let's just start with a new calibration over here. First things first, you're going to put your vehicle's information in right here. We obviously have a 2007 Honda Civic R18, so we're going to pick the 2006 to 2011, and there's sub options. I don't know why they have these sub options, but make sure you stick with your year. And we have a 2007 R18 US automatic transmission. That's what we're going with. And then we have all this list right here. It's a sub list. Let me just make sure I'm still recording. Oh, all right, so now I actually selected the factory settings, but as you can see, there is a tuned setting right here. The fuel injectors come 185cc factory, so we have a couple options for fuel injectors and the type of modifications. Mostly right over here, a couple intake exhaust modifications. There is a turbocharged base map here running 410cc RDX injectors, which is very, very good. You're going to want to use this base map maybe when you start turboing your vehicle, and other options and whatnot. Again, we're just going to start off with the factory settings here and run through the factory settings in Hondata. Now, here you got some icons on top, and the main icons you're going to be using is calibration. So this is the main adjustable parameter windows, and here again it summarizes what tune you selected. If you wanted to write notes right over here, like if you wanted to adjust the air fuel ratio and target a 13 AFR, you can select that. And can't spell already, and I barely drink, so AFR 13, you know, let's say you have a intake header, wow, I'm really bad at this, intake header exhaust, yeah, really bad. Intake header exhaust, let's say you're running 93, you can put that in there, you know, whatever you want to do, just so you know your mods and the tune. You can add those notes over here. So let's start off by going to fuel. Okay, there's a lot of parameters here, and we're just going to go down the list and explain them to the best of my knowledge that I know how to explain them. But first, all right, first things first, you're going to have your injector size. Again, the factory fuel injectors are pretty tiny for our R18 Civic, which are 185cc injectors. And I'll tell you right now, you're definitely going to want to upgrade injectors here if you're going to do any serious modifications. Fuel pressure is tested at 3 bar, so we're going to leave all this the same. Fuel trims, again, the car runs in open loop and closed loop. Most of the time it's running in closed loop, where the oxygen sensor is adjusting all the parameters of air fuel ratios. On a open loop, it's actually just using predetermined fuel tables to just dump into the engine, and it's not adjusting from any other sensor. Anyway, every fuel injector is going to have opening times, dead times they call it, and you want to apply these dead times based on voltage right over here. So if I was to select 410 cc injectors that the Acura RDX comes with, which is a popular choice, we're going to have to find out the voltage dead times of that and the times in microseconds. Again, remember, it's microseconds, not milliseconds, it's microseconds if I'm not mistaken, and we're going to have to adjust those parameters. So that way, the fuel injectors, which are 410 cc, open and close appropriately, so you're still getting the same fuel tables and air-fuel ratios that you would with your factory injectors. So, long story short, for example, if I put 185 over here, enter that, look how these numbers on the bottom will change, okay? Because the main thing here is with changing it's actually adjusting by itself based on the cc increment. So right here, let's look at this 100 milligrams of air mass coming in, 2.54. And now let's say we use the bigger injectors, enter that amount. What do we see? 1.15. Because the injector's pushing in more fuel, we don't need it open as long as we did for the 185 cc injector. So that's nice. This overrun fuel cut delay means that the fuel injector is not going to stop spraying fuel until a couple milliseconds after it's told to stop pouring fuel. So what this table right here helps with is rev hang, and it's just making a smooth transition between on and off throttle and off throttle. We are definitely going to end up adjusting that on the automatic transmission, and it's going to give us some benefits, which again, I already adjusted some things prior, messing around with things, and I did see some improvements. Now, right here is a big thing right here. We're using the air fuel meter or mass airflow sensor in order to recognize and determine how much fuel we're going to be putting into the engine. So that mass airflow sensor 1 needs to read properly, needs to be positioned properly, and it needs to be in a pipe that's the same diameter as stock. If you change the intake, well, now your fuel trims will be all off because the air velocity going through that mass airflow sensor is not the same. It's probably not reading properly, and therefore you're either going to run lean or run rich. But again, using these tables here, like the AFM fuel table, you're going to be able to adjust the fuel trims in closed loop, which is going to give you a proper combustion. Now, let's just say we're back to 185 cc stock injectors, guys. Let's say you just want to tune your Honda Civic R18, okay? Once we data log, and I'll show you guys how to data log and everything, and we're going to be adjusting fuel parameters pretty much by basically selecting a couple units here. We're going to right click and click the adjust button. And we're going to, let's say we want to increase the amount of time the fuel injector is open by 2%. So we're just going to actually add a 2 here, and you're going to see these numbers, like the 100 number right here, increase. So let's click that, and it just increased by 2%, and it actually highlights the boxes where you made changes. So right now we're adding 2% pretty much up to 750 milligrams of air coming in that the mass airflow senses, and it's adjusting that and adding more fuel. So that's the first table, guys. I've been pretty much using the AFM fuel table quite a bit here recently and playing around with the fuel cut delay a little bit. So let's go into the subcategory here of fuel, which is wide open throttle Lambda adjustment low. Now, you guys know there's one camshaft on the single overhead cam R18 engine, and it does have dual lobes, which a lot of people call VTEC, which is not really VTEC, it's a fuel economy VTEC. The low cam, right, is actually our more powerful cam. The high cam is actually the fuel efficiency cam. See, on a SI motor, we got the exact opposite. Your low cam is your more fuel efficient cam, and the high cam is where it goes into VTEC crossover. Well, get that out of your head, guys. We're dealing with a EcoBox R18 motor here. The low cam is your main cam, which will create more power. What it does is on cruising speeds at RPMs, I believe it's between 1500 to 3100, it goes into this high cam, which is more fuel efficient for the vehicle and whatnot. So just remember that when you're tuning the R18, which cam is which cam, because when I first started, I had issues and I wasn't sure exactly what is what. Regardless, this is wide open throttle. So when you got your pedal mashed to the floor. These are the air-fuel ratios that we're telling the computer to target from this table, which again, most of the time. And let me turn off this boost option here, and we're going to show the naturally aspirated columns right here. No boost, guys, not yet at least. But we got RPM going down and air pressure in the intake manifold, pretty much how much vacuum there is. And essentially, we're targeting at red line 12.06 air-fuel ratio. Now this table is not optimal. Again, these tables are meant to have fuel efficiency and emissions in mind. So we're definitely going to be adjusting this table as we go along. So again, there's a low cam or low, yeah, let's just call it cam, I guess. Low cam adjustment, wide open throttle, and a high cam, which again, right here, the only difference are the last couple columns where here it's still targeting 12.46, but you're never going to see this area right here on the high cam, because again, it'll probably cross over into the low cam once you're in the higher RPMs, if that makes any sense. Now we got cranking fuel, how much fuel you're gonna drop in when you're starting the vehicle. Again, you really don't have to mess with the cranking fuel unless you really are doing a high-end build, and in that point, what you're probably going to do, you're probably going to have to increase, right click, select right click, and maybe adjust by like 2% more fuel, and that way you'll be able to crank her up. Cylinder trim, what this means is how much fuel you want to trim from each cylinder. Now the thing is, our oxygen sensor only gives us a total package of a fuel trim and air fuel ratios, short-term fuel trims. So let's say the car as a whole is reading 5% fuel subtraction, right? Negative 5% short-term fuel trims. We really don't know what cylinders to subtract that fuel from. So I guess you can subtract like 1% from each cylinder. Again, you're not really going to have to mess with this at all. Air temperature compensation and coolant temperature compensation is next on the list. And again, these two tables here, you don't really got to mess with. These are factory settings. And essentially what this is saying, with cold or hot temperatures, how much fuel it's trimming. And as you can see, 0 trim, 0 trim, 0 trim. And right here, it only has a fuel trim adjustment for cranking. If it's really hot, it's going to subtract some fuel to start with, and that's perfectly fine. No big deal. Don't even adjust these. The car should be running based on the factory settings just right. Coolant temperature compensation here, this does play a little role, but again, you won't have to mess with this for the most part. When the car is cold, we're actually adding more fuel because this is perfectly normal, and you want more fuel on a cold engine so it runs properly. Because it's so cold, a lot of the fuel is getting actually stuck on the cylinder intake, on the intake manifold, going into the combustion chamber. It's attaching itself a little bit to the cold walls of the engine, and that's why you want a little bit more fuel on the cold engine. Again, these compensations here, leave them, don't touch them. And that's pretty much it for the fuel segment of the Hondata calibration. Let's close that up. And we're going to be talking about the next best thing, and the kind of confusing thing, ignition. And before I do ignition, I need some ignition right here. So let's jump into ignition. Ignition is pretty much when the spark plug fires. Now, a lot of power is made based on changing your ignition timing. The sooner we can hit the spark before the piston goes to top dead center, we can make some more power to a certain extent. We can't just advance the ignition way too soon, or we run the risk of damaging the engine pre-ignition, possibly blowing the rods on a boosted application. So you got to be careful. When you're starting tuning, you're going to have to start off adjusting air-fuel ratios and getting those right. You want short-term fuel trims and long-term fuel trims to be near 0, plus or minus 5 for long-term, plus or minus 10 for short-term. Once you get those dialed in on your setup, you can play around with spark timing. Again, let's just run through this whole process here. Ignition low, which is our powerful cam ignition. We got ignition here, and again, the lower your speed, you got higher ignition timing, but towards red line, which I guess we can say all these right here are red line wide open throttle pulls. We're maxing out at around 28 degrees of ignition at wide open throttle at maximum RPM. Now, if you were tuning this and you wanted to increase some power, we can take some of these boxes, let's say right over here, and we can increase the ignition timing, let's say by, and we'll go on the degree one, 2 degrees. And right now we're running 30 degrees of ignition timing, which is 2 degrees before your factory tune, which will give you some more power. Again, I haven't tuned yet, but this is the general concept of it. Now your high cam, again, has its own set of ignition timing. Again, everything pretty much over 3500, you're not going to have to adjust because it's going to switch over to your low cam, which is more powerful cam, the wide open throttle cam. So we are good on that department. Ignition timing is very sketchy, and if you don't know what you're doing, you don't want to mess around with it too much. Now, cylinder trim, again, if you want to decrease or retard the timing, retard means the spark is happening later in the combustion cycle. Advancing timing means it's happening before the top dead center. We're not going to mess with any ignition trims here. And then there's also a air temperature compensation. So there's no fuel compensation really for air temperature, but there is ignition compensation for air temperature. So the hotter the engine gets, we're retarding the ignition because we don't want that hot fuel to combust prematurely and cause knock. So that's why, as you can see, on a colder engine, there's no engine retard. The warmer your intake air temperatures get, we're retarding the ignition timing again because we don't want the fuel to prematurely explode before it's meant to explode. And that's going to be called knock. Knock kills motors. Knock is no good. Knock lowers your K control, and which we'll get to eventually. And the higher your K control on Hondata, your computer thinks you have shitty octane in the vehicle, which it's going to give you ignition retard. And if it's cutting ignition timing, then you're losing power. This might sound a little bit confusing right now, but eventually through this build series, I'll explain more on the tuning aspect of it. Again, I started tuning with no idea behind tuning, guys. A lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of determination to learn this. A lot of computer time, again, on Hondata, running through different data logs, trying to see how this works. YouTube University resources and whatnot, a lot of free resources, and we kind of got a gist of what the hell's going on. As far as tuning, if we're actually going to be able to tune a vehicle and make it run properly, we'll see, we'll find out, but at least I know what I'm talking about, so cheers for that. Thumbs up, boys. So, coolant temperature compensation for ignition timing. So the colder the engine is, it looks like it's advancing timing. And then the hotter, again, the water temperature is, it's retarding timing. So again, most of these things you don't want to mess with. Actually, I wouldn't mess with any of those things because they're preset from the factory and they look pretty good. So we're done with ignition. Fuel and ignition, guys. We just covered the two most important things of tuning a vehicle. So let's go ahead and run through the rest of these settings here. VTEC. Again, this is not VTEC. This is Ecotech, I would call it, you know. Essentially, it's the second cam lobes on our single overhead cam. And between 1100 to 3500 RPMs, it's changing the valve overlap, which means how long the intake and exhaust valves stay open. Also, we have an adjustment here for our intake runners. There is a flap in our plastic intake manifold, and that flap opens and closes based on these RPMs here. Again, this is sketchy. There might be some adjustments under this table here that we will be making later on. Maybe trying to keep the car in the original cam lobe, which is the low cam lobe, which is the more powerful cam lobe. We might be able to possibly move this way higher in the upper RPM range so it never activates, and we'll just always stay on the low cam, which is our more powerful cam. But don't quote me on that. I'm still learning. I'm still experimenting. We'll see what's going to happen with that. But honestly, I don't mind if it crosses over to the Eco Cam during cruising conditions. This car will be a daily driver, so I don't mind it crossing over to the Eco Cam during highway cruising. Next parameter here is closed loop. Now, closed loop again is when the oxygen sensor is making fuel adjustments on demand after combustion happened. So right here we have oxygen sensor, our secondary oxygen sensor. If you're running a header with no cat, you want to take this out of the system because otherwise you're going to run the risk of having a check engine light. Now we also have an option here to use our map sensor to determine wide open throttle. Now factory, we're using our throttle position to determine wide open throttle, but if you guys want to use a map sensor, which you definitely will want to do for boost, once it starts seeing boost or before boost, you want that to go to our wide open throttle map again, which was right over here. Our wide open throttle maps were right here. So the faster those wide open throttle maps kick in, you're going to give the engine more fuel, less prone to knock, and hopefully make more power. So closed loop here. Here we got some options of fuel trims. What's the highest and lowest amount of fuel we can subtract during driving and add during driving, both short term and long term. If you're tuned right, this is a huge range. You know, this will get your car running to some degree. It's not going to run perfectly, but the bigger the range here, and I'm not sure what the maximum would be, but the higher the chances are your car will run. It's not going to be ideal, it's not going to be properly tuned, but it won't be shutting off on you. So again, you can adjust when your car goes into the wide open throttle map if you select this checkbox, and then you can adjust when the car goes into wide open throttle based on the PSI or the vacuum or whatever option this is here to jump into wide open throttle. And I've used this, I've tuned and I've used wide open throttle based on the map sensor, and I like it, guys. I like it more than the throttle position sensor. Right over here we have our oxygen sensor, and whatever this is, it's a conversion based on millivolts, and essentially you don't want to touch this. This is our calibrated oxygen sensor, and it's telling us the proper air fuel ratios based on this calibration. There's no reason why you would have to adjust this table. I know some SIs have a corrected air fuel ratio sensor. I'm not sure if the R18s are corrected. I don't think they are. Again, the oxygen sensor is not really a wideband sensor. It still reads quite a bit of range, above 14.7 stoichiometric and below stoichiometric, but it's not that accurate. If you're going boost, you definitely want a wideband sensor, but I've heard people tuning without a wideband sensor using your factory oxygen sensor. A couple tuners I talked to actually said we can get away with tuning based on the factory oxygen sensor. But at Dyno Shop, they're still going to put an oxygen sensor either somewhere in the downpipe if there is a bung available to put the shop's oxygen sensor or wideband sensor in there, or they'll put it in tailpipe. And then you can compare the wideband output and your oxygen sensor output. As long as they're similar, you're fine. As long as the tune is good, air fuel ratios are good, you shouldn't worry too much about blowing your motor. All right. The next thing we have here is target air fuel ratio. Again, stoichiometric 14.7 is what you want. And on a cold engine, we want to run richer. Again, like I mentioned before, on a cold engine, guys, on startup, you want more fuel in the engine because the fuel sticks to the cylinder walls and the engine, and you want it to run properly. You got to run richer. You got to add more fuel. So this table pretty much is telling the computer to dump in more fuel when the engine is freezing, and that's perfectly normal. Don't touch this. You don't have to worry about it. Next one, very, very important, knock control. We all know knock is not good, right? So there's a few limits here that I will show you. I'm not too familiar with the ignition tables, but I do know one powerful tip that might help you guys out to lower your knock count when you're tuning your vehicle. Now, knock tables are very complicated. I'm not going to really get into it. Again, there's a knock table for your regular cam, your eco cam, but what's important is the knock sensitivity. The higher the number on the knock sensitivity, the less likely your sensor will pick up knock. Your knock sensor is very sensitive, and during certain RPMs, it's picking up ghost knock. Ghost knock is knock that's not really existent, but it thinks it's knocking. Because it thinks it's knocking, again, it's raising our K control higher. And again, I'll get into K control, but what that means is it's going to cause ignition retard while driving, and we're going to be losing power because the engine thinks we have crappy octane in the vehicle. and therefore it's going to be reducing ignition timing. So one thing you can do, take a segment right over here, let's say. We're going to take this segment and increase this by 5%. What that just did right here, it's going to cause the knock sensor to not be so sensitive during that RPM, and it won't pick up that fake ghost knock. Because it's not picking up that ghost knock, the car runs better, it doesn't have to cut ignition timing, and it's just happier. It's kind of a push and pull with changing the sensitivity tables of the knock sensor, because the question at hand is it real knock? And if it is real knock and I'm just desensitizing it from the real knock, then you're just going to end up causing some damage in the long term on the engine. But if it is fake knock and you're just eliminating this fake ghost knock, then you're going to have more power potential and it's going to improve driving characteristics of the vehicle. Again, this is just very short, basic summary here, guys. And then you also have options how much maximum knock retard you will see at what RPM and at what vacuum pressure, both for the low and the high cam gear. And that's pretty much for the knock sensor, guys. Very important. A lot of people are experiencing a lot of knock. My vehicle stock on the stock tune is knocking all over the place. And now I'm just worried because are my injectors better? Are my spark plugs back? No, a lot of people on the stock tune are knocking, which is absolute crazy. And the question is it real knock? I believe it's absolutely not real knock. My car registered knock at idle, and my car is running perfectly fine. It's 100% ghost knock, and we got to eliminate this ghost knock from the oxygen sensor. So essentially, like I said, we have to not deoxygenate. What am I talking about? We have to desensitize the oxygen sensor in order for the car to run properly and not register all this knocking. Rev Limits is the next protocol here. We can set our rev limit, and once you hit rev limit, at what RPM does it recover? We have a launch RPM and launch RPM recovery. We have a speed cut, and when you just rev it, what RPM it's going to cut at, maximum speed. And for you boys that are running boost, remember our map sensor is good for about 10 pounds of boost. Just to be safe, you might as well just cut boost pressure at 9.5 pounds. If it sees anything over that, it's just gonna cut the fuel. Make sure your engine is safe, because if you overboost, boys, you're gonna blow those rods out of that motor and you're gonna have to start all over again. And at that point, just get an SI if you're rocking an R18. But next options here, we have the sensors. Again, our stock map sensor is good for 10 pounds. You can get the RDX, which is the turbo model, which a lot of people use the 410cc injectors from. It's good for 26 pounds, not a bad option, but you want to compare it to the Hondata 4-bar map sensor right here, which is good for 40 PSI, and I believe this one is around $100. Whatever you can get cheaper is probably your best option. I don't think anybody's going to be pushing 26 or 40 pounds on an R18. But just remember, I believe if you're rocking an R18 automatic transmission, the Hondata 4-bar map sensor is not compatible to my knowledge, so you are forced to run a RDX map sensor for an automatic transmission if you want to boost more than 10 pounds of boost. All right, gentlemen. Afm sensor, again, your mass airflow sensor reads between 0.01 to 5 volts of airflow coming through. You don't want to touch that. You don't want to touch anything here. AFM, ladies and gentlemen, the mass airflow sensor has a filament inside of it, and it's called a hot wire. And as the air goes through that wire, it cools that wire, and that's how the sensor senses how much air is going through that pipe, that diameter pipe. Now, you see that airflow in mass flow, grams per second, and it also has a voltage associated with it. One way to tune the fuel tables of the car is by adjusting the voltage here and adjusting the flow rate. So, for example, if we want to adjust the air fuel ratio here from 1 volt to, let's say, 2 volts, right over here, we're going to select this, and let's say we want to adjust and add more fuel. We would select 2% more fuel during this voltage here, and that's going to increase voltage during that airflow. Again, you'll have to data log and acquire some data before you do these adjustments, I'll probably break it down to you guys on another video, how to data log for air fuel trims, how to set it up so you can see everything. But that's the general concept. This is one way to adjust fuel trims. And again, right here under the AFM fuel, right here is another way to adjust fuel trims. So you can either adjust fuel trims from the injectors or from the mass airflow sensor if you're tuning via mass airflow. Again, let's go and continue with all the settings here. Next parameters we have is idle speed. Again, idle speed varies greatly based on temperature. If your car seems to be stalling out at warm temperature at idle, you can always increase it, like the last couple tables here. Let's say here, if it's dying out, we can increase the RPM to 1,000 right here. Sorry, let me adjust that set value to 1,000. Right, let's say here we're gonna adjust this to 750. Again, if you got a cam, if you got a lumpy idle and it's dying out on you or something like that, you can adjust these right over here. Oops, right here. Again, nothing really you got to mess around with unless your car is giving you idle problems. Next thing you got is the throttle. So tip in fuel based on engine coolant temperature compensation. I never really mess with that. I don't think you have to mess with that. Tip in fuel throttle compensation. This is actually something that might be interesting. Every time you depress the throttle, it adds more gas into the engine, just in case you want to go wide open throttle right away. You don't want to run lean during a full throttle spike. So it does drop the air fuel ratio by a couple points. If you're noticing when you first get on the throttle and it's going way too rich, running like 11 or 10 air fuel ratio, and then backing down to your target air fuel ratio wide open throttle, you can actually subtract some fuel. You can subtract 1% based on how much throttle you're putting. You can subtract 2% or let's say 3% based on more throttle input. Again, you'll have to data log, watch the data logs, and base that off your adjustments. Throttle plate, don't mess around with the throttle plate settings. I don't think you have to I don't think you have to mess around with the throttle plate settings. And then at the end of the whole 9 yards, we got miscellaneous adjustments here, which are pretty much a couple sensors we can deactivate. We can deactivate the EGR. A lot of turbo guys are deactivating exhaust gas recirculation valves. We don't need that when we're turbo. If you're running a couple codes here, you can deactivate it here so you don't see that annoying check engine light. Again, this depends on how much modifications you put in the car. If you're going forced injection, you're probably going to have to deactivate some more of these because you're moving a lot of sensors or you're deactivating a lot of sensors. But that's pretty much the gist of Hondata, guys. Those are all the parameters that we have the adjustment to on the R18 engine. The Civic Si has a lot more adjustments, and the Hondata S300 for the older Civics even has more adjustments. Again, the R18 is a limited platform, but we still have enough adjustments here to do forced induction, do a heavy NA build. It's pretty good. The SIs also have adjustable cam gears that adjust timing based on cam gear, or the camshaft angle based on RPM and whatnot. So they have a lot more tuning aspects built into the Hondata, which again, I'm kind of grateful for that. This is pretty simple because me being a new tuner, just learning all this, it's a lot simpler to comprehend because I looked at some of the SI options and I got confused, guys, with the cam angle and degreeing all this stuff and adjusting everything. It was kind of complicated, but those are all the settings that we can adjust, guys, and we're still rolling, so that's good. Now let me just show you guys a couple of things here. Graphs, right? Your data log graphs are going to be right here on the bottom, and I do have a couple data logs, so I'm going to pull that up for you right now. And we're going to have that data log here. We're going to click our display. On our display, we can select anything we want on the display. Short-term fuel trims, long-term fuel trims, air fuel ratios, map pressure, engine coolant temperature, intake air temperature, RPM, knock counts, throttle. All that stuff is going to be adjusted, right? And we can click sensors, and on the left-hand column here, we got all the sensors in the vehicle working and getting statistics from the car, which again helps you, and sometimes you might have to pay attention to these sensors. These areas right over here on the display are pretty much some sensors that I pull up, but I like to see them visually, or if they're more important to you, you want to see them bigger, those are the sensors that you want to put on. And again, you can modify this, put them wherever you want, so this is fully customizable. And on the data log here, guys, we can play it right here, and as the car is driving, we can see what RPM it is, map pressure, throttle pressure. In closed loop, we can see the short-term fuel trims, again, oxygen sensor subtracting fuel from the vehicle. We can see the air-fuel ratio that it's currently on, ignition timing, the duty cycle of the fuel injectors, how hard they are working and whatnot. And again, real quick, I'm just going to zoom in into a wide open throttle pool right here. As you can see, 5,000 RPMs, 6,000 RPMs. This gentleman right here, because I'm actually helping my boy tune his vehicle, he's running, look, 7.5 pounds of boost right here, targeting 12.66 air-fuel ratio. He's running 410cc RDX injectors with a 65% duty cycle, which they still have plenty of fuel they can deliver. So let's look at that, 7.5 pounds, 7.6. What's he going to max out at right here? How much boost is he going to see? Just about 7.6 pounds of boost. Again, everything looks pretty good. And that's it, guys. You can adjust it. If you're not seeing something you want to see on the data log, you can always go back into the tables here. And we can go back into wide open throttle, adjust our wide open throttle. We can do pretty much whatever you want endlessly, as long as you know what you're doing. You definitely want to, again, screen time, very important. Do a lot of reading, do a lot of research, find out the general mechanics of a car, how it works, what is ignition timing, what is air fuel ratio, and whatnot. And hopefully slowly you guys will get the gist of it, just like I did. Again, this is my first turbo build on this R18 Civic. This is my first car I've ever tuned with. This is the first tuning software I've ever looked at, but hopefully you guys see how much I know about it. And honestly, I knew nothing about it a couple weeks ago. So it's possible to learn. It's fun to learn. It never hurts to be educated about how your vehicle runs if you're an automotive individual. And this is the Hondata software, guys. This is $700 worth of software and adjustability if you're paying retail. And this adjustability here is what we need in order to make our turbo Honda Civic run properly. So thank you guys for watching this video. Drop a thumbs up if you've learned something. Subscribe to this goddamn channel, because I'm trying to grow my subscribers to at least 10,000 subscribers by the end of this year. So watch the turbo build, guys. It's going to be pretty much one of maybe 3 on YouTube that has been documented, but I guarantee you that this one is going to be the goddamn most detailed write-up informational segment you have seen on an R18, hands down. And if you agree, subscribe to the channel, boys. Cheers, have a beer for me. Hope everyone's staying healthy. Catch you on the next video. Peace.
I ain't here for the money, I ain't here for the fame. Though it might be nice to own a jet plane, I'ma do it all for you. Come along and see it's true, but the world is pretty cold. You might need a sweater too. I'ma put a ride on ya. Kid from California, trying to make it in life. In school they never taught ya.